antagonizes some of his superiors, but he gets things done. In 1908, Orville Wright sells an airplane to the United States Army, and Mitchell, now a captain, is one of the military observers. Most Army men regard the airplane as a risky contraption, but Mitchell is fascinated by flying. He says men will someday wage war in the skies. 6 years later, Mitchell's prediction comes true. In the early years of World War I, the risky contraption begins to emerge as a deadly weapon. By 1917, planes play a major role in the war. The American Army has only one plane in France, flown by Major Billy Mitchell. He's one of the few Americans at this time who even knows how to fly. American generals put the airplane in the same class with observation balloons. Soon other American pilots arrive in France, but they have no planes of their own. They have to fly in French and British aircraft. As chief of the air service, now promoted to colonel, Billy Mitchell pleads with the United States to build up its own air might. Finally, Mitchell's requests reach General John Pershing. He eventually loses patience with Mitchell's unrelenting demands, and he decides to reshuffle the air service. Pershing, in effect, demotes Mitchell to third in command of the American pilots. Americans must still fight in foreign planes. Our general staff, says Mitchell, is trying to run the air service with as much knowledge of it as a hog knows about skating. The American flyers, however, score stunning victories. Most of these aviators on both sides are adventurers. To them, aerial combat is a gentleman's game, so the stakes are life or death. They are knights of the sky with a romantic code of combat. Says one of them, we live dangerously, we kill with chivalry, and we try to die gallantly. It's always a proud day for Colonel Mitchell when he can award his pilots medals for heroism. The American aces are colorful individualists. Most of them are in their early 20s. All of them idolize Billy Mitchell. Eddie Rickenbacker, a former racing car driver, is America's top ace, shooting down 26 planes in only 5 months. He's Mitchell's protege. Says an enemy pilot, Rickenbacker can thread the eye of a needle with his machine gun. Baron Manfred von Richthofen, only 24 years old, is Germany's top ace. A cool, methodical strategist, he blasts 80 planes from the skies. He paints his plane an unmistakable red because in combat, he wants enemy pilots to know that their adversary is Richthofen, the Red Knight. The name of Hermann Goering takes command of Richthofen's squadron after the Red Knight is killed in combat. Goering is the opposite of the calculating Richthofen. He is impulsive and reckless, boastfully proud of shooting down 22 planes. July 1918. The German armies unleash an offensive on a long front just 40 miles from Paris. Commanders realize that this move could determine the result of the entire war. They desperately want to know just where the Germans plan to concentrate their most powerful attack. In a lone plane, Mitchell volunteers to find out. He flies over enemy lines, risking certain death if he's seen by enemy squadrons. Suddenly, close to the Marne River, he discovers thousands of German troops heading toward one point on the front. Mitchell races back through enemy skies to report the German strategy to his high command. His flight will soon be hailed as one of the major exploits of the war. Using Mitchell's information, the Allies launch a surprise attack on the German flank at Chateau Thierry. After 4 years of fighting on the defensive, the Allies score a major victory. Mitchell is now placed in command of the largest aerial armada of the war, 1,500 Allied planes. Mitchell's assignment? Attack the Germans at Saint-Michel from the air, while 500,000 American troops attack them on the ground. The combined might of the air and ground offensive crushes the German army. They will never recover. The airplane becomes just a big toy as far as most Americans are concerned. Stunt pilots barnstorm the nation. Billy Mitchell, however, has different ideas about the future of aviation. He outrages the Army High Command, his own superiors, by charging that the air service is being neglected, that national defense suffers because most generals are blind to the significance of aviation. The United States Navy receives the full force of Mitchell's relentless attacks. Heavy warships, not airplanes, are generally regarded as the bulwark of national defense. But the battleship, declares Mitchell, is as helpless against planes as the knight in shining armor was against firearms. Give us the warships to attack in a test, he said, and come watch. Mitchell is making powerful enemies. Then the newly elected president, Warren Harding, steps into the controversy. He promises that he will create a powerful air force if Billy Mitchell can demonstrate that planes can sink mighty warships. Harding doesn't say, but it's understood that if Mitchell fails, his enemies in Washington will show him no mercy. June 1921. General Mitchell finally has his chance. Confidently, carefully, he prepares for the test. 1- and 2-ton bombs, the largest ever made, are loaded on many of his planes. But Mitchell's opponents say that even these bombs can't sink huge ships. On July 13th, 1921, Mitchell leads his bombers out over the Atlantic off the coast of Virginia. Below him lies the Challenge, a destroyer, a cruiser, and a giant battleship which many admirals believe is virtually unsinkable. Looking down at the ships, Billy Mitchell knows that he must sink them, or his long crusade and his own military career will be destroyed. Billy Mitchell begins his test, the airplane against the warship. High-ranking Army and Navy officers watch tensely from a nearby transport. Most of them predict and hope that Mitchell will fail. For if he succeeds, the prestige and influence of the Army and Navy will suffer a humiliating blow. The first target, a German destroyer. And with astonishing speed, the destroyer is blasted out of the water. Next comes a German cruiser, the Frankfurt, 5,000 tons of steel and armor. under the bombing but stays afloat. There's one naval observer. I'm feeling better every minute. Finally, the Frankfurt meets its end. Antagonist grimly watches the tests. Now the crucial challenge. Mitchell's planes attack the German battleship Ostfriesland. This dreadnought is called the unsinkable ship. Mitchell says, all we have done will be forgotten if we fail to kill and bury the Ostfriesland. History ever sustains more devastating punishment, but the battle wagon refuses to sink. The attack is halted for an inspection. Says Mitchell, she appears like a bulldog, where the Frankfurt had looked like a swan. The warship is badly damaged, but the inspectors ruled that under actual combat conditions, she would still be dangerous. She could still fight back, and the battleship admirals rejoice. Mitchell will now get only one more crack at the unsinkable Ostfriesland. The final attack begins. It is Mitchell's last chance. From their observation ship, many of the admirals openly weep. One seemed to be watching the end of an era, writes a reporter. And he says, as the warship plunges beneath the waves, Billy Mitchell flies above her like an angry eagle. The overwhelming power of the airplane has been established. But as he flies back to his base, Mitchell has no idea that his struggle has barely begun. President Harding forgets his promise to build a mighty air force. He is the head of a corrupt administration which is rushing toward exposure and disgrace in the Teapot Dome scandal. Harding can't bother now with airplanes. A new aerial test is held. Anti-aircraft guns blast away at a target towed by a plane. The battleship admirals hope to prove that aircraft can be easily shot down in actual combat. Mitchell wins again. The target has been hit only once. By now, Mitchell's opponents have had enough of his agitation and his tests. They have him demoted from brigadier general to colonel, and they oust him as assistant chief of the air service. But even as he breaks in his successor, Mitchell declares that the bureaucrats in Washington must be jarred out of their swivel chairs. September 1925, an airship, the Shenandoah, embarks on a publicity flight for the Navy. Its commander has asked for a postponement of the trip because of reports of severe storms in the area. But his request is turned down by the Navy Department. The Shenandoah, they order, must make its tour. 13 crewmen are killed in the crash of the Shenandoah. Mitchell publicly blames the high brass in Washington. Brave airmen are sent to their deaths, he says, by armchair admirals who don't know and don't care about air safety. And then he charges, the high command of both the Army and Navy are guilty of incompetence, criminal negligence, and almost treasonable administration of the national defense. The new president, Calvin Coolidge, is outraged by Mitchell's accusation. Perhaps the strongest ever unleashed by a United States officer against his own superiors. The the president orders that Mitchell be court-martialed for insubordination, which is exactly what Mitchell wants. October 1925, the trial begins. Arriving with his wife, Betty, Mitchell is confident and eager. By provoking his own court-martial, Mitchell feels that now he has his last but his best chance publicly to expose the Army and Navy departments. Retired Admiral William Sims is one of Mitchell's defense witnesses. An advocate of air power, Sims will tell the court that the Navy is controlled by what he calls hidebound, unfitted, and uneducated admirals. During the court-martial, Mitchell repeats his charge of treason. The Army and Navy are treasonable, he says, for not improving the air service, for violating the public trust. But the court hears the prosecutor call Mitchell an ambitious opportunist. He's a danger to military discipline, the prosecutor says. Throw him out of the Army. The court-martial board, which includes General Douglas MacArthur, emerges with the sentence: guilty of insubordination, suspended from duty for 5 years without pay. Only MacArthur votes against the sentence. Mitchell decides to resign from the Army. He can no longer wear the uniform of which he's so proud. He can no longer fly with the Air Force which he founded. Time now with his family. His services aren't wanted by the Army. But foreign leaders like Benito Mussolini take Mitchell's ideas more seriously than Americans do. Mussolini begins to build an air force for future conquest. Soon, Adolf Hitler will forge his mighty Luftwaffe. He will teach the world the meaning of mastery of the air. The German High Command studies all of Mitchell's theories. With the Second World War looming on the horizon, Mitchell urges the United States to prepare, to be ready.
It is conceded by every first-class power in the world that air power will determine the next war. Each nation is organized now to mass its air power at the beginning of a contest. Instead of the armies and navies being the objects of the attack of air power, they will go directly to the vital centers. Our future in this country depends on air power.
For 10 years after his court-martial, Billy Mitchell continues to plead for air power. He likes to remember his Air Force days, and he talks warmly about the pilots who served under him and who are now high-ranking officers. My boys, he calls them. He will die in 1936 at the age of 56, a disappointed, defeated, but gallant man. It takes history itself to vindicate Billy Mitchell in the eyes of his country. His prophecies come true with tragic accuracy. German militarism endangers the world, he said in the 1920s. Air power will be Germany's deadliest weapon. In 1917, he says, the British Isles will someday be vulnerable to mass aerial attack. Airborne armies can be dropped behind enemy lines with devastating effect, Mitchell tells General Pershing in 1919. Japan may unleash a war in the Pacific, Mitchell warns in 1925. She could attack America by striking first at Hawaii some fine Sunday morning, he says. April 18, 1942. The aircraft carrier Hornet, somewhere in the Pacific. Now that his country is at war, the late Billy Mitchell is finally recognized as a neglected prophet. And in an ironic way, the nation will pay him tribute. Lieutenant Colonel Jimmy Doolittle will lead a surprise bombing raid on Tokyo. His planes are B-25s, sleek, fast, and powerful. And in honor of Billy Mitchell, they have named his plane the Mitchell Bomber. Billy Mitchell would have been proud of this moment. Early months of war, American forces have been suffering humiliating defeats. Now, for the first time, American planes strike at the enemy's mainland. This raid by the Mitchell bombers gives the American people a taste of victory, a surge of hope. The Air Force, which Mitchell founded and fought for against overwhelming odds, has proven itself again. In 1930, when few men in high places would listen to Billy Mitchell, he said, "In their lifetime, my children will see aviation become the greatest means of national defense and transportation all over the world. And possibly beyond our world into interstellar space." It was Billy Mitchell's tragedy that he had to fight virtually alone for the future of air power. But it was his country's tragedy that its military leaders didn't listen to him at the right time. There's a footnote to this story. For his long and dedicated struggle, Billy Mitchell was awarded a special Medal of Honor by his nation, 10 years after his death. Mike Wallace for Biography.